Here's what I'm going to try to do because I talk about my, testimony, if you will, a lot from like the stage, or I have like little sound bites that I say a lot in sessions with people or when I'm talking
Mm.
publicly. And I would rather this be more of a vulnerable share, right? Like more like two friends sharing their testimony. So that's what I'm going to try. So if you hear me like stumbling over my words a little bit, it's because I'm trying not to use the words that I would normally use from the stage. So I don't like sink into that rhythm of just like saying it without really feeling it. But yeah, I mean, I think, I grew up in the same movement that you did. I grew up in a Christian home and I was really loved. I mean, my parents did a great job raising me. They weren't perfect parents. They would agree with that too. But my parents became disciples when I was, I think, maybe 4 or 5. So I was pretty young, but they had, they got married because my mom grew up Catholic and my dad grew up without really much religion. And so they got pregnant at like
Mm.
few weeks, several weeks maybe into dating. And so they had to get married and they got married really quick. And so as I'm sure you can imagine, within 4 years, they had two young kids and their marriage was on the rocks. Oh, I'm having a ball over here with this party emoji. Their marriage was on the rocks. And so then they invited God into their life, started living for God. And like to their credit, right? I just think someone who grew up, my mom had a faith and that was really central to her life growing up, but my dad had no faith. And just to seeing like where they came from and where they were in their marriage and their life at the time, they were both really young. And then at 4 or 5, they made God the center of their life. And to see what they were able to do in their parenting and in our home is so impressive to me now, being older and being able to look back and really understand what they must have been going through. So I'm so grateful for that because though there were, I mean, I grew up full of insecurities. I share all the time that I related more to my dad than my mom, especially in terms of my femininity. I felt very insecure and out of place. I was more like my dad than like my mom. And so that led me to believe something's wrong with me. I'm not the way that I should be. Um, but even with all these insecurities, I knew I was loved. I knew that my parents loved me a lot and would do anything for me. So I had a pretty good relationship with both of my parents, I'd say, until probably my high school years. And I think this angst that I felt in my femininity just created this wedge between me and my mom. Really had nothing to do with her or what she said or did. It just had everything to do with my own insecurity. And so that led me feeling really angry toward her. And I started kind of searching for ways to feel validated in my femininity, mostly in friendships with other women and particularly friendships with older women. When I say older, I mean like a year or two older than me in my grade. Somehow, I think that was what I was looking for. It was like validation from an older woman to say, you are enough, you are woman enough. And so I had a few friendships that got really emotionally enmeshed, crossed lines, became very idolatrous in my own heart. One in particular that got really idolatrous, and I became very manipulative, emotionally manipulative, started lying, like all this stuff because my entire identity and sense of self was wrapped up around this friend. So of course that friendship didn't end well. When she, went off to college before me, she was like, "Hey, you're a little weird now. Like, let's not be friends anymore. That's too much." And I remember feeling like I am floating through the world with no tether, like sort of that. Have you ever seen the movie? Oh gosh, I don't even know the name of it, but with Sandra Bullock and
Oh, gravity.
George Clooney, Gravity, where she's like floating out in space.
Yeah.
Like that's how I felt. It's like I'm floating in this vast space with no tether, no anchor, no identity, no sense of value or worth. And it was really a scary, like that feeling you would feel floating in space. I sort of felt like that, like terrified and small. And so I really quickly befriended someone that I'd known, a few years before in middle school. I was probably in my last year of high school, maybe. And our friendship got really close really quick. I would say a red flag now, right, in terms of codependency and enmeshment. And because that can happen a lot with, especially with women, when you're in an emotionally enmeshed friendship, it's very easy for physical boundary lines to be crossed. And so that's what happened. And that kind of led me to this life of homosexuality. I lived as a lesbian for a time. She and I dated for a couple of years. And I remember feeling, even while dating her, like there was still a hole in my heart. I was still searching for the thing. I hadn't found it yet, right? Like what would make me fully fulfilled, happy. And even while I was dating her, I remember thinking things like, Who am I? Where does my value and worth come from? Who am I? And I would always define who I was based on other people. I am so and so's daughter. I am so and so's friend. I am so and so's coworker, and I would also define myself based on like my hobbies and interests. I'm a fan of this band and I'm a fan of that language or, this brand. And the problem with that is I felt like I was on this roller coaster because when things in my life were going well, like I was going to a concert with my friends that weekend, I had a lot to look forward to and I felt really fulfilled, like I had purpose in life. Then that concert would come and it would be over. And then I would dip into this sense again of who am I? What is my value? What's my worth? What do I live for? And so I felt like I was going through that for a few years, even in this same sex relationship. Now, I will say it did take the edge off, right? Like, I really think what I really wanted, even from a very young age, is I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be adored, right? I think about even being a kid and dreaming about being famous one day. Like that's the desire that was coming out of those dreams of being famous. Like I want to be adored. I want to be loved. I want to be sought after and wanted. And so I like this relationship that I had, it took the edge off of those desires, but it didn't fully fulfill them like I thought it would. And nothing did, right? The bands that I liked, the jobs that I had, the things that I was studying in school, nothing really filled that. So when I was 20, or maybe 19, I decided some things had to happen in my undergrad. My dad sold his business. I went to a private school that was really very expensive and I had some financial aid. But then my dad sold his business and we had this big influx of money on his taxes. And so I couldn't afford to go to that school anymore, but it was too late to apply for another school. Like it was happening the very late of the year. So I kind of just had to piecemeal my undergrad together from a bunch of different universities. So because of that, though, I was doing a lot of it virtually and I was able to travel. So I was like, well, let me move. Well, first I moved to Florida. My girlfriend and I broke up. And again, I felt devastated. Who am I? I moved to Florida to kind of like lick my wounds and heal. And that was I think an important time of growth for me. But after that, I decided I'm not done with this traveling thing. I'm going to move to Ireland. I don't know why. My family thought I was totally crazy. I'm Italian. My family's from Italy. And they were like, you're going to move to Europe, but you're not moving to Italy. You're going to move to Ireland. That's so weird. And truthfully, Georgia, if you're going to ask, I already know what you're going to ask. Why did you choose Ireland? Let me tell you. Have you ever heard of Celtic Woman? Probably not.
Musician.
Real British people. Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I
Like
do
real
know them.
British
I
people.
do know them. They sang Fields of Gold.
Yes, they do. And lots of other like British and Irish folklore music.
Yeah.
Well, the Celtic Woman got really big in the States around this time, mostly on like PBS. So let me not say really big, but like, for old people or people who like to watch PBS at 2 a.m., I don't know. They were always on, right? They're on like those fundraiser shows. So I heard them once and I was like, this music is heavenly. This calls to me, it draws me. And so truly, I think that's why I decided to move to Ireland. I think I heard Celtic Woman and I was like, I must go to their homeland. I really have no other
Like
explanation as to
sirens.
why I chose. Yeah, exactly. They sirened me to Ireland. And I would literally like, I remember preparing to move to Ireland. I was running, this is me running. I was running through like a trail near my house that I was living in. And I was listening to them, like preparing to move to Ireland in a few months. And you would think that I'm listening to like hardcore rock music, like running through but no, I'm listening to like, yeah, Fields of Gold, like this very ethereal music. And I'm like running through the wilderness, like preparing to move. It was very important to me, this music. So anyway, I moved to Ireland and I remember being on the plane right there thinking like, this is it. Finally, I'm going to find, right. I had just gone through a big breakup. I was like, I'm a clean slate. I had gone through this period, but even before I started dating my girlfriend previously, that I grew up in the church, but I don't know if that's what I believe. I was sort of like pushing away from my parents' beliefs. I got to figure out what I believe. So that all culminated on my ride to Ireland. Like, this is it. I'm going to figure out who I am, what I believe, what I want out of life. And I was really like opening up the doors here, right? I was like, I'm going to sleep with men. I'm going to sleep with women. I'm going to figure out who I am, who I'm attracted to, where my life is headed. And I'm just going to enjoy my life, like find happiness, right? And so I got there and I was so miserable. It was like the worst experience of my life. I lived in a converted, like what I would call a garage, and I was paying, I don't even know, probably like 400 euro for it a week, like a lot of money. It didn't have any hot water. I had to wash my hair in a sink with cold water. And I was working full time, but I was working as an intern. So I was only getting paid 50, would you say euro or euros?
Euros.
Okay, I was getting paid 50 euros. I've always had that question, even in Ireland. I couldn't figure it out. Anyway, I was being paid 50 euros a week, but paying like three or 400 and living in this converted garage. I didn't have many friends and I was going broke by more and more broke by the second. Honestly, I ate most every single meal in my room alone. And I got it from a gas station on my 30-minute walk home from work. So I was just like this sad, lonely existence. What I was thinking was going to be so wonderful. And I remember just like this was like eroding the hardness around my heart. I could feel it. I think my loneliness, I just read the other day actually that if you look at specifically the prophets, but like people in the Bible, that loneliness
Mm.
uh is like the instigator of closeness with God. Oh, I know what it said. It said loneliness is where prophets hear from God. Like they have to feel that intense loneliness
Whoa.
before they can hear God. I know, isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
So I didn't hear any prophecy from God, but I did start to feel like that hardness eroding. And I just got so tired of this existence. So I started like reading the Bible a little bit, praying a little bit, and mostly listening to like some Christian music. And so I felt like my heart softening a little bit. And I would sort of envision because I felt really lonely. And sometimes I felt scared. I was 20 years old in a foreign country. I didn't know like the dangers. And so sometimes I would envision like God was laying next to me in bed or like holding me to keep me safe and keep me give me comfort. And so like these kinds of, connecting moments with God would happen, but I was pretty anti God, right? I was like, I don't really want anything to do with him. He's the God of my parents, but I'm not really interested in it for me. I will say, side note too, I got into a pretty bad car accident right before I went to Ireland, and I, uh, it was just like really I think the only car accident I've ever been in, but it could have been really bad. I wasn't super hurt, but it could have been bad. I was going like 70 miles an hour, and I hit some T-boned them. They, pulled into the intersection, and I was totally fine, like not even a scratch on me. But the police officer said, you should have died like that, or at least been severely injured. And so I remember like, I don't know if it was that night, but a couple days later, I remember being in the shower and I just realized, whoa, God saved me. I should be dead right now. And he saved me. And I remember I got on my knees in the shower, which I don't recommend. I think it's really dangerous. And I was just like, thank you, God, for saving me. And so that was just days before I left for Ireland. That was really my first touch point with God in a couple of years, right? Like I grew up in the church and then probably around 15, 16, I sort of said, nah, I'm done with that. I don't want to have anything to do with God. And I went and lived, this gay life for a while. And then, then this moment where I should have died is finally like my reconnection with God. I wasn't interested in living for him or learning more about him. It's just sort of recognized his power. So
Mm.
I think that coupled with this loneliness that I felt in Ireland started to soften my heart. And so I remember praying one day on my way to work,
Mm.
God, I'm so tired of being unhappy. Please just let me be happy today, right? Like I can't go another day feeling this oppressive sadness. And all day I did feel kind of like this levity, this lightness. And I remember like all throughout the day taking stock, like, wait a minute, did I get a new job? Do I have cause to be happy? No. Do I have friends? No. Is there anything that's changed in my life? No. And then I realized on my walk home, oh, I prayed that I would have this moment of levity, and I did. So that was like a big moment for me and God. And so I told my parents, hey, oh no. So first, I did end up getting a job interview up in the north, not Northern Ireland, but the north of the Republic.
Mm.
And it was in a really remote location, like so remote that the bus only goes there once a week. So I
What?
had to schedule this interview. I know, is that not normal
That's
for
not
that?
normal. That's crazy. Oh my goodness. That's very
It's a
funny.
pretty rural part. It's in Killary Harbor. So it's like the only fjord in Ireland. So it's like up in the
Wow.
mountains, very remote. And so I had to book it for, Wednesday morning because I had to take the bus Tuesday night. So I get there and uh, I'm the only one that gets off on the stop. It's pitch black. There are absolutely no lamp stands or lamp posts anywhere. And so I get off and I ask the bus driver, I'm already feeling a little insecure. Like I'm the only American on this bus. I'm the idiot that doesn't know where I'm going, right? I could be getting off on the totally wrong stop. I have no idea. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to this place. Where is it? Do you know? And he said, you just walk a tick down that road. I don't know what a tick means. What does that mean? So I was like, okay, thanks, buddy. You don't know that's not British speak?
Never heard that. That's so Irish. Yeah.
He's like, you just walk a tick down that road. And so I got off the bus. He pulled away. The headlights with the bus went with it. I'm in pitch black dark. And I look around and thought, what road? I can't see. And I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I mean, I could not see a single thing. And so I took out, Georgia, when I say I took out my phone to use as a flashlight. We didn't have smartphones back then. Okay. I had a flip phone. It did not have a flashlight. So I like remember those dull battery, like
Yeah.
I was like take this tiny little Nokia screen trying to like highlight a road in front of me. I could not see a thing. So I start feeling on what I think is the road. And I get maybe 15, 20 steps and I start to hear rushing water. I'm like, I don't know much about geography, but I know that Ireland is an island and there's water all around. And I'm in the middle of a fjord. Like, am I gonna die? So I did something really dumb and I start running. I don't know why. I know I should have run. I start running toward where I think the right place is. Finally, I see a little bit of a light. I go, it was probably like maybe a half a mile. I have to walk in the pitch black dark. I get to a place. It's not even the right place, but I think they've had such compassion on me because I probably looked terrified. They were like, we'll make you up a bed. It's fine. So I stayed there and I Skyped my parents and I was like, that's it. This is the final. I almost died tonight.
Yeah.
I'm coming home. This is ridiculous. Like, I came here to be happy. I'm more miserable than when I left. And my dad was, listened to me and they're all like, And finally, when I kind of calmed down a little bit, he was like, Ellen, I've been wanting to tell you this for a while. And I think now you're finally ready to hear it. He said, I think you've been searching in all these places, right? You've been in this relationship and that relationship. You went all the way to Ireland to find out that you're just as unhappy as when you left. Maybe it's time to give God another chance. Like maybe it's time to look back into this God thing. And I said, it's funny you say that because for the past several weeks, I've been so lonely that that's the only place that I've thought to turn. I've been listening to music and praying a little bit and thinking about God more. And I was like, don't get excited. Like, I'm not professing, my love for God right now, but I want to learn a little bit more. So we agreed we would start studying the Bible over Skype. Um, over the next couple of days. And so we did. But the next morning I woke up, I was in this place and, where when I woke up, I remember thinking, surely this is the ugliest place on earth. Like it must be fire and brimstone, right? Because it almost killed me the night before. I hate this place. Well, I wake up and there's these big bay windows and it is the most beautiful place I have ever seen, right? Like purely out of yeah, I don't know, like purely out of Eden, really. But yeah, just like only God could have created this place. It's so beautiful. And like that kind of beauty doesn't go without some effect on your heart, right? So I did my interview and I had, several hours before the bus came because it only came once a week. So I walked like 3 miles down to the nearest town. And it was on this windy Irish road with like sheep on a mountainside on one side and a body of water, and then like snow capped mountains beyond that. It was so beautiful. Like I'm walking in a painting, and I was like singing out loud, praying out loud. I kept singing, "Who's that walking down the road?" And it was just the most light I've felt, in years. And I was envisioning that I was holding God's hand on this road. So then I went back to where I lived and went back to work. And my parents and I were studying the Bible a little bit over Skype. And we studied out sin and we read Isaiah 59. Hold on, I quote Isaiah out loud. I don't want to get it wrong. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2, I think, where it says, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear, but your iniquities have separated you from him and they've hidden his face from you. And I was so devastated by this scripture because I realized that when I was walking on that road with God just a few days before,
Mm.
holding his hand, feeling so light and connected to him, that I actually wasn't holding his hand because I couldn't because of my sin. But what got me is I knew I wanted to hold his hand
Yeah.
and I knew he wanted to hold my hand, but like there was this barrier of my sin keeping us apart. And I was so like, I could not stop thinking about that scripture. It's like this gong resounding in my head and my heart. You are separated from God. Your iniquities have separated you. His face is hidden from you. And so that weekend, I had scheduled to go to in the south of Ireland to Cork to the nearest church where there were six whole people in that church.
Mhm.
And it wasn't the nearest church, it was the nearest church of the movement that I grew up in. And so I went, it was like 6 hours by bus. I went to the church. I was feeling like I'm really love God. I really want to learn more. Like this is getting really serious between me and God. And I had such a great time with them, six people, but it was really like a reunion of, God's people. It was so cool. And and we had a great weekend. And then on my ride home, like the further away I got from them, from the body of Christ, just the more oppressive sadness I started to feel. Like I was moving back into that space of I'm going back to my life, but I know that I want to be with God, but I'm not. I felt what it's like to be with God's people, but now I'm leaving them, going back to this life. And I just kind of hit this wall and I was like, I can't go on like this. I must be with God. And so I got back to my room. It was probably midnight, maybe 12:30, and I packed up all my stuff. I'm walking down these like cobblestone streets of Galway at 2 o'clock in the morning. Went to the bus station, took a bus to the airport. I slept in the airport. It's like this out. I don't know if you've ever been to Dublin Airport, but there's this. It's an outdoor portion, and
Yeah.
the indoor portion wasn't open yet. So I slept basically outside,
Oh
but
my.
it's like covered next to there was a homeless man a little bit ways away. Anyway, I slept there until it opened and I flew home. I finished studying the Bible. I was baptized. And the funny thing is that my parents, when I called them, I was like, I'm coming home. I must be a Christian today.
Mhm.
And they were like, no, no, stay there. Like, we're going to make plans. We'll come and baptize you Friday. It was like Sunday night. And I was like, nope, can't wait that long. Must be now. And so by the time I had traveled home, it was Thursday that I was baptized. So for 24 hours early, I went through, spent all this money and all this craziness, didn't sleep for over 24 hours. And yeah, so that's how I became a Christian. And then I ended up going back to Ireland. I did get that job up in the north. And that time, like going back with God was such a stark contrast, right? What was so full of despair and loneliness was now this like literally honeymoon between me and God. Like I had this 2 month honeymoon where I could just be with God, commune with him in the hills of Ireland. And it was awesome. And so, yeah, that's my story of how I became a Christian.
What my goodness, I love that. What a roller coaster. I love that
I
so
know,
much.
right?
I had no, because you mentioned living in Ireland, but the way I had conceptualized it in my mind before was like, oh, just like a study abroad. Now I'm like, it's just
Of my own making. Yeah.
it just wow, it's just so such an adventure. Oh my goodness. But also just such like a adventure, but also um like quite there was some sort of like peril in the first part of that.
Right. That's
Do
how I
you know what I
felt.
mean? Like I'm like there
Yeah.
was like this sense of like kind of Lord of the Rings level peril, especially because Ireland is so like this like mountainous. Like it just reminds me of
Yes.
that. I was like, wow. I do have a couple of questions. I'm curious about when you were growing up and when you like with your parents being Christians and growing up around the church, who did you understand God to be at that point in your life and what made you decide to sort of push him away at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I saw God kind of like my dad. Like he was loving, but very harsh. And my dad, and I'm like this too, so certainly no judgment on my part, but he's a man prone to anger. I'm a woman prone to anger. And it often when we have angry outbursts, it doesn't make sense to the people around us because they can't see all that's been happening in our hearts. So I a lot of times felt like my dad specifically growing up was unpredictable. I didn't feel safe, emotionally around him. because I thought you never know what's going to set him off. And so you better mind your P's and Q's. Like you better, just walk on eggshells to avoid an angry outburst. And so I think I kind of saw God the same. Like I knew he loved me, I knew he was loving, but I also saw him sort of like a police officer and a little bit like a judgmental, angry dad. And yeah, and I think probably most everyone goes through that
Mm.
at that stage in life. It looks different for everyone. Obviously, it's not as stubborn and obstinate as it was for me. But and I think also part of it was that I grew up in a church culture that was very legalistic. And I think I was just starting to see how some of that wasn't congruent with who maybe God was.
Mhm.
And so all of it just made me feel really disillusioned, right? Like, oh, these people who are supposed to represent God, I don't think they're doing it right. And I didn't have the wherewithal at the time to have grace and mercy and compassion and be aware of my own shortcomings. And so it just came at, I just saw that very judgmentally, like these people aren't representing God well. So I'm not sure it was really about God. I think it was really more about the church culture I didn't want to be a part of. And to me, that was so synonymous with God that I decided to, no, I'm done with it. I don't want that right now. And I think part of it too is I wanted to sin. I wanted to figure out like what's all this stuff everybody else is into. I want to figure out what that's like drinking, smoking, doing drugs, having sex. I wanted to see what that was all about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think you're right. Like it's very much like we all go through those early uh distortions, as you would say, of like who God is and like and how a lot of that is tends to be mixed up in like what church ends up being or like what the flaws of your local church end up being or the church you grew up in end up being. And then it was interesting because yeah, like to go from like yeah, I suppose maybe you kind of answered this, but I was really struck by the intimate ways you were able to understand God in Ireland, like this idea of like him being with you in bed or like just like covering over you and you know, you hadn't really had like much like of a relationship, would you say, with God up to that point, but you had access to this kind of like understanding of him or like what do you think yeah, what how did that
Hmm.
I don't know, like what led to that?
Yeah, I guess pure loneliness. I mean, I think probably part of it is what I saw growing up with my parents, right? Like I think and I've heard this too from them growing up that being a Christian doesn't mean you do the right things and don't do the wrong things. It doesn't mean follow the rules of your church culture. It's a relationship with God. And so that probably was part of the foundation, that led me to that. I think too, in pure loneliness, I wanted a husband, a protector, someone to offer me comfort when I was laying in bed late at night in Ireland, afraid if I was going to live to the morning. I wanted more of like this husband figure to like wrap me up in his arms, say, "It's okay, I'm here, I'm your protector, you're going to be fine." And so I think it was just easy to correlate with that with God in my loneliness and be like, I need a protector. I need someone who loves me and adores me and wants to offer me comfort right now. And so I just kind of turned God into that, I guess. It was in my loneliness. There was no one else to fulfill that role.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's lovely because it feels so accurate to who God is, and I think
Hmm.
that's really beautiful. And I'll ask one more question, but I how did you? Because I think something I felt as a young person, like deciding to become a Christian, I think something a lot of young people can feel is this idea of like whole life ahead, am I going to make it? Like this idea of like, I can't make this decision because I'm so scared of not, of like falling short, of like not being able to like make my
Yeah.
whole life. And then I think also like fears of missing out, kind of, uh, are, are kind of into that. But yeah, I suppose I'm more interested with you, like sort of this idea of like, can I make it? Like, can I actually do this for the rest of my life? Like, did you fear that? Or like, did you, or yeah, like anything like that. Like, did you have any fears around becoming a Christian and like those sort of like final, I don't know, maybe cold feet moments?
No, but I think that's why I didn't become a Christian earlier in my life, right? Like that I got baptized at 20, which is kind of late in life for most of the people that I grew up with, right? Like normally they would become Christians much earlier in their life. And so I was like the granny being baptized at that point in life. But the reason I didn't become a Christian before that is because I wasn't ready to commit, right? Like that's just, I think how I'm wired a little bit. I'm like loyal almost to a fault, right? That's kept me in some bad relationships in the past. This is my loyalty. And I knew like I'm not gonna halfway anything, especially something as important as a relationship, especially with God, right? So I think that's a big reason. Like I wish my brain was a little bit more formed back then to be like, hey, it's not that I don't like God or that I hate him. I love him and I'm interested in him, but I'm just not interested enough to live for him right now. Like that's how I'd characterize it now. But back then I didn't know how to do that. I only knew how to say, I hate God and I'm going to figure out who I am outside of him, right? I only knew how to characterize it that way when I wanted to go explore it, life. So I knew early like I'm not ready for this. But then when I like really fell in love with God during that time in Ireland, no way. There was no question. Like one of the things my dad said to me before, he ended up baptizing me as we were kind of studying. I'd made it back to the States at this point. He said, I think you really love God. I think if you read that God wanted you to jump off a bridge, you would. And I was like, absolutely, I would. Like, I'll do anything for him. And I still like, I think that's part of how I'm wired. Like, I'm a very all in, 100% kind of person. But I still feel that fervor today, maybe not in the same like young way that I once did, but I still feel like I will do anything. I have this sign above my computer here. It says, whom have I in heaven but you? That is like, I still feel that like God is my one and only. And I really felt that in that moment. And yeah, so I know a lot of my peers that I grew up with did have that question like, wow, this is a big commitment. Can I do it? But I was a little bit older than they were when I got baptized, but also I was like, I'm for sure can do it. I will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I feel like I maybe I'll probably speak to it in my in my like testimony bit. But actually, okay, I actually have one more question now.
Yeah.
Uh, so then with becoming a Christian and then re-entering church life, how did you find that? Because obviously, you'd kind of had this like teenage understanding of like this is not I don't like all of this is flawed and messy and like there's like some legalism that I don't love. Like how did you
Mhm.
find in becoming a Christian re-entering like church life and like fellowship and but doing it like from a place of like I suppose acknowledging that but then also being like I'm now a Christian and I'm gonna I don't know how to finish
Yeah.
that question but do you even you know what I mean.
Yeah. And it's a great question. Honestly, I think we could probably do a whole podcast episode just on
So
that
true.
because I would say it's still a journey. Like I'm still figuring that out after, I don't even know, 15 plus years of being a Christian. So, I would say though that initially, well, one thing that probably helped that I didn't have any control over was that the movement that we grew up in was sort of going through a lot of changes right before and during my conversion. And so that helped, right? Like it changed the culture a little bit. So it wasn't as legalistic, which was helpful. Um, but also, I think what really made the difference for me is that it was really difficult. I still kind of buck up in my heart against when I feel controlled or see some of that legalism or I see that polishedness that I grew up with that isn't raw and authentic. But what really helped is that sort of in my early Christian life, I decided I have to see past the church culture and past the people that I'm, with or even under, if you will, in ministry. And I have to see past to God, that I serve him. What I do is for him, not for the praise of my ministry leaders or anything. And that was really tough because I think for a while it was like natural in this church culture to please your minister, to please your, ministry leader and let that kind of fuel the service that you have for God and his people. And so I don't think I think in some ways that's natural, but I think we can't forget that we're doing it for God. I think I probably went too far in that where I was kind of like, screw you, ministry people. I do this for God. Like it was a little too, I had to kind of level out a little bit. But in my early walk with God, I was like, no, I live for God, nobody else. And, but yeah, I think that's really what made the difference is seeing past to God. And I think the other thing, not in my early Christian life, but since then, as I've matured a little bit, is just to see my own shortcomings and it helps to have a lot of grace for people. And then it also helps, of course, with heart set above, right? My whole mission in life is to try to see through God's eyes. And when I strive to see through God's eyes, I can see, well, one, this person is fully loved by God, no matter how much they've upset me. And two, they love God. They might not be acting in their love for God the way that I would, but I can't deny that they love God and what they're doing, they really believe is what's best before God, standing before God. And so I can appreciate the heart in which legalism and, all polishedness and all that kind of stuff is offered, even if I disagree with how people live it out.